We looked back at notes over the past year and found we did a full circle, a complete boomerang, if you will. Joe Rogan hosted yet another individual on his famous podcast recently, and we discuss that interview today. We are in the Christmas season, so Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. Yep, Mom made sure to have that tree up for this episode specifically. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Kalen. Dad is the co-host and my father. We are super excited to talk about this because, again, I didn't realize it was this long ago, but we talked about White Oaks pasture last year. Actually, literally almost 365 days later, here we are again talking about Joe Rogan's guy. This guy was Dale Brisby. If nobody's in the Western comedic satire realm, you might not know Dale Brisby, but he's essentially a guy out of Texas that is just a goofball on all sorts of social media. He's got a fantastic following, and he mostly focuses on rodeoing. His conversation with not Dale, but Joe Rogan focused mostly on rodeoing, but there were aspects of ranching and agriculture as well that I wanted to talk to Dad about and have a discussion. So I have some initial takes, but I'd like to see kind of what you thought of the overall discussion before we jump into it.
Well, I mean, he really shows a subculture
Yeah.
in our, industry. And it's not he is in the agricultural portion, but he's more into the sport aspect of it through the rodeo. He's done some day work, some cowboy work, which is a little bit, again, it's different terminology too, because there are a number of subcultures that if Joe's looking for different types of subcultures, it isn't just one. Everybody thinks, well, he's a cowboy, they're all the same. Well, there's not. It's a varied and wildly different type of cultures when you're inside of it and looking around. But anytime anything is sporterized, and people want to see people try to stick on the back of an animal, it looks sexy. And of course, some of these guys they're young, they got a lot of vibrato, and so it creates a sense of sexiness to that. So it's not what we would do and not what we do normally, and most ranchers don't. But his take on stuff, what is he, like 45, I think?
Dale Brisby? Like,
yeah.
No, he said it was in the podcast, something around, I think he's like 36, 38.
Okay. Okay. I was saying, okay. Yeah. He's under 40. And it's like, you know what? If you ask your mother, we're all just teenage boys. I mean, no matter how old you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's no different. And those guys, they're having a fun time. They're having a blast. I've seen, you talked about JB Mooney, who is, there is no way that guy is not going to stay a name in the sport of rodeo and particularly bull riding for generations, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's like what I remember as the Casey Tibbs when I was a kid, and guys are not hearing that name anymore.
No, and I don't even know of Casey Tibbs, but I know I think he'll be in the lines of like rider. Oh, Saddle Bronc. Okay, that's why. But I'm thinking bulls specifically because of JB, but I'm thinking Tough Hedeman.
Those are later
Lane
guys.
Frost is known mostly because he was such a hot commodity when he had his tragic death.
Yeah.
And I think he's more known for his death than he was, unfortunately, for what he accomplished.
Outside of rodeo, yes. I think that's exactly right. And in rodeo, because he'll live forever.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But I think
that's Brown. Do you know who Freckles Brown is?
No.
See, these are names. Larry Mahan.
No, I've heard of him.
Yeah. So, but the name of him will just go on for, generations, literally, because JB Mooney is just absolutely a superstar, of bull riding. I mean, he's just, and I've seen videos of him screwing around and he's like a 13-year-old kid, like we all are.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
grabbing a
think that's
hot
why him
shot.
and I think that's why him and Dale Brisby get along so well.
Oh, sure,
Because
yeah,
there's just freaking yeah. We'll get to that though, because
shenanigans.
it's
But
part of it.
one of the things, because you see part of what Dale is doing with his videos, and
Yeah.
there's satire. I mean, he's quick-witted, he is funny, you know. And I think
Well, and
Rogan's
his
right, he could be a stand-up comedian, but it's outside of his, like, ooh, I
comfort
don't
zone.
know, because you're just not used to that sort of stuff. But
Well, like Joe Rogan pointed out, he's like, man, that's a massive buckle you got on there. And it says, I mean, it's the size of a dinner plate and quite literally. And it says world champion, and underneath of it says this
this
year.
year, yeah,
So
that's
I mean,
awesome.
if that doesn't just explain his personality, I don't know
That
what
made
does.
me laugh out loud when he did that. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
how many people don't get that, with this
No.
giant, I mean, it was just ridiculously big. It literally is the size of a dinner plate,
Yeah.
So I mean, we've joked about those guys that walk around with belt buckles like that. But
Hmm.
the fact is, I'm wearing a belt buckle. I got a belt buckle that I have for work. You got me for Christmas, and it says "Just Ranching," and it's a Dale Brisby. You get that several years ago. It's a great buckle. I use that for my work pants, my
Yeah.
work belt.
Well,
Uh,
it was a retirement gift because you were
yeah,
gonna go onto the ranch full time. So I said, hey, even though it's Dale Brisby and he's most of the stuff that he's got is just goofball stuff, like I figured just ranch and fits the
right.
situation. So I got it for you.
Yeah, didn't have to have that outside job anymore. But the thing that surprised me about him, going back to his comedic ways, is that the guy, obviously he does some reading, he's got some other interests,
Yeah.
pretty dang well rounded, on just general knowledge and stuff. And I guess I was surprised in a way, but not surprised. I mean, we got some really smart people in this industry, that why wouldn't they have any other interests? I mean, we're not just, kind of kick your toe in the dirt and say, oh shucks. I mean, there's some smart people. Obviously he's one of them. And so it was very interesting to see him talk about that, his interest in, like jujitsu, and he just recently taken up bow hunting,
Well,
all
but
that kind of stuff.
you heard the part about the jujitsu though. He got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu a little bit because of the ridiculous that we identify. We're like, oh, that's funny, that's hilarious. I'm enjoying it because it's a take on some of these people. But he goes, I'm actually kind of concerned that somebody might take this too seriously and they think that like I'm this guy. And he goes, it's just my personality of like online because like you don't know me for real. Like,
Yeah.
and so that's why out of safety precautions, he got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. His persona. People sometimes, they are too literal, just
Yeah.
way too literal. So it's interesting how that affects your life and the measures you have to take sometimes to, because you never know who's gonna take something the wrong way and just do stupid things without thinking.
Well, and I think that's a good start into what I wanted to kind of begin with, but I'll start with it was kind of crazy listening to Dale Brisby. I got, I might say DB just because I've got it as shorthand on my notes here, but it was crazy listening to him without the ridiculous nature because it's always like, hey, I'm the top hand around here. And then you
Right.
hear him actually sit around and talk like a normal human being. You're like, all right, I got a double take here for a second, get some culture, just some shock out of the way, and then like, okay, now I can listen.
Well, it's funny because he can't let it go.
No.
There was one part in there where I was laughing because he was talking about JB Mooney and him being the greatest of all time, the goats. As Dale, there's uh JB and me, we're the goats, and I'm like, no, but it just goes past. And some of his stuff is really quick witted like that. You got to
Yeah.
listen, otherwise you can miss it.
There were a couple of times I heard it because Joe Rogan's not, he recently moved to Texas, so he's kind of familiar with the culture now, but he's still not quite there.
Yeah,
And there were a couple of times where he said, yeah, the first time I ever went on a bull, it bucked down on me and then it came back up and I had to learn how to ride into it
yeah,
because that's his big thing is bull riding. He goes, but then after that, I just started pulling the bull up. And he said
yeah,
that and just kept going with it. And you could hear like the pregnant pause because Joe Rogan didn't quite get it. And I was like,
yeah,
I got that. That was pretty funny. But
yeah. He got jerked down once, so he started jerking the bull up. I thought that was funny. I
yeah.
mean, that's something I would come up with. I mean, uh,
But I thought the one cool thing was, he came into the podcast and he brought some gifts. He brought a brand new hat
yeah,
for Joe Rogan
yeah, that was pretty
and
cool.
his brother handmade a belt for Rogan, and I don't know if he did some silver work too with the buckle, or if that was just part of their business and they put it to the his
Yeah,
brother's belt. But
I didn't see that
uh,
closely, but his brother handmade that belt, so that was
yeah, I
pretty
thought that
cool.
was cool. But then I did notice too, the hat was backwards to begin with when Joe Rogan put it on, which that's okay. You're learning. And then he grabbed the hat by the brim. I'm like, goodness gracious, get your hat or your hand off the brim. Like you got to learn some
Yeah.
things here.
Well, it kind of made me laugh because I got a good friend that he wears a straw hat even in the wintertime. And
It's always
he
backwards.
half the time it's backwards. Gotta
Yeah.
tell you, turn your hat around is backwards. I mean, he doesn't care.
No.
Doesn't bother him a bit.
But did you notice the broken fingers on Brisby?
Yeah.
One of the first things I noticed too. He was kind of pointing up into the camera, and you could see his fingers were crooked. And I'm like,
Yeah. A little
he's
crooked.
a worker. He
Yeah.
earned that.
Yep.
Those are
Yeah,
some of the
I
details
noticed
people don't
some of
recognize.
those little things that you see in guys on you're looking at their hands and you go, yep, he's got her in a tight spot or two.
Yep.
You
I was
know.
thinking between the hands, and then you watch how a guy walks, and you're like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
you've either been in a couple of real bad wrecks, or you rodeoed a little too hard for too long when you were
Yep.
younger.
Yep.
Some
Yeah.
of those things.
You don't get hemorrhoids on your butt from sitting at a desk chair like that, I guess.
Uh-uh.
It's the only other way
Nope.
you'd move.
The last thing I had on the initial take for him though was he said something I loved it. In quotes, he goes, "I can't imagine living anywhere else." He was talking about Texas, but I think you can equate that to, people in Wyoming,
Right.
especially us in Montana, people in the Dakotas, um, this lifestyle. And it was kind of a thing, an ongoing theme during the conversation is just, I can't imagine doing, living, seeing, experiencing anything other than what I do every single day. And I just love it. And that was kind of his
Yeah.
theme.
And I agree. And I think we all feel that same way. Um, Similar lifestyles, similar, interests, similar experiences, but I can't imagine doing it in Texas. I can imagine because it's here. I can't imagine being down there. So I think it's wherever you're doing it
Yeah.
is really what it is, but it's irrelevant. It's still the lifestyle because you can't do this in certain areas. You can't do this really well in the southern LA, that basin. I mean, it doesn't lend to the ability to do that. So having the experience wherever you're at is going to be, I can't imagine doing this anywhere else, or because that's what you're tying it to, is that particular place.
Yeah. Uh, some people might go, why don't you folks just, I don't know, do your own interview with this guy instead of talking about Joe Rogan 2 times in 1 year? Well, that would be because we just don't have the platform yet, but hopefully one day we will, because I would love to talk to somebody like Dale Brisby and have these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but moving on to that early discussion, I thought it was interesting. They talked about eating meat will ruin the world, and essentially, their take on that's not actually accurate. It's not realistic. I'll kind of talk about some things with, Joe Rogan. And this was, I think you and I kind of talked about it briefly earlier this week. And I said, hey, just hold it. We'll talk about it when we talk about it, which is now. And the thing was, yeah, I'm looking at my notes. If anybody's like, why aren't you looking at the screen? It's because they were talked about White Oaks pasture, and Joe Rogan is all about this R word. And the R word is, I don't disagree with it, but it's overpopulated and overutilized, in my opinion. It's propaganda to an extent, and it's regenerative farming, regenerative ranching, that R word. And he talks about it with White Oaks pasture, and I agree. White Oaks pasture is a very unique way of doing things. I love it. We watched that episode. We discussed that episode last year. So if anybody wants to check out that card right there. But the thing was that I've seen this by other people too, on they talk like us about this in this kind of a forum, but you can't do that to scale.
Right.
He's got a certain small amount of head, which is fine. Like he helps produce for I don't remember what it was. Was it Whole Foods or something?
Whole
And
Foods. Yeah.
and they incorporate, goats, pigs, chickens, turkeys, cows, all these things, but that's not the scale. Like if you want to go to scale and produce like most people do for the United States and to support the United States, that's what we do, is to scale. If you're looking to do just your community, which is what that gentleman does, That's accurate. That you can absolutely do that, but it's just not realistic with what Joe Rogan is hoping for with
Right.
regenerative stuff. Like that doesn't fit the bill. And plus, kind of like what the I think Dale said on there too. I don't want to deal with chickens.
Right. Well, and yeah, exactly. I like eating them, but you know, I'll uh, I'll entertain an occasional egg a day.
Yeah,
But other than that, yeah, the minimal is fine. Um, one of the things that I noticed, and again, it goes to the differences between and the viewpoints of the different aspects in agriculture. Now, and something Joe brought up was he doesn't like the fact that animals are put in trucks. He thinks it looks bad, and he said they're packed in. Well, what a lot of people don't understand, if you give an animal a lot of room in a trailer, they will get hurt.
yeah. That's
They
actually
need to be
contrary to what you
tight.
believe.
Right. It's counterintuitive. And how else do you get them to market? Market doesn't come to you. You have to get
Yeah,
these to like the backgrounders or stockers from the calf weights. Like we're the cow calf producers, so and we background some of our own for butcher, but different aspect. But when you take a cow calf pair and then you wean them and you take those calves and you put them in a backgrounder, they have to be hauled there or a stalker. And then from the time they get to be a stalker, they go to a lot, they got to be hauled. Well, when you haul them in a truck, if you give them what you would think would be some humane amount of room,
yeah.
it's not humane because every one of those animals are going to hit the ground and you're going to hurt them. If they're pushed in there where they're not where they can move slightly, they can breathe, but
Snug.
they're snug, but they don't have the ability to be knocked around. And I
Yeah.
think that's not talked about enough. Um,
Well,
the reasons why, and it's something very small, but it's something that just kind of bothers me that and again, PETA jumps on that stuff, and
sure.
Rogan noticed that and has said the same thing. He says, man, they get on this don't eat meat stuff, but that's the humane way to do it. Otherwise, you will lose animals, you will hurt animals. So
Right.
how it looks is how it looks, and you know what? Like you said, people don't want to have a look at how it's done. They just want to have their steak or their
No,
burger, and
it's
you have to look at it in its totality.
no, absolutely. It's convenience, and that's kind of what they talked about, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that I had some notes on that later that we can kind of cover. But the point too is the counterintuitiveness that you're talking about. It's also like when we've done it with the shoots, moving calves during branding season and stuff. And maybe we can try and do a video to explain this one day. But you don't want to be a half a person away from the rear end of a calf, even a little tiny guy. They can get a wallop on those legs. Whereas if you're right up on their butt and you've got your thighs touching their rear end and you're keeping them close and snug, they might pop you, but it's going to be a whole lot less hurting than what you
Yeah.
would think. So
A lot of
keeping
times
them
you can push
snug
them
like
with
what
your,
you're
yeah, you kind of stand sideways and push them with your hip,
yeah,
and that, yeah, they'll kick you, but that's just the nature of the beast. It's a whole lot better to be kicked with a short kick than it is right out the at the end of a stroke.
right.
That can hurt you, and then when you're working cows, or larger animals, even yearlings, larger stuff that really can hurt you, they can break a bone. Then you have a whole different tactic. You're not up close to them. You're kind of off to the side and watching them and getting them out of the way, and you're actually getting them to move a little bit easier than a calf. Calves are, they're dumb. They don't understand, and you're kind of having to push them around. So, they get a little bit age on them, and they become a little bit more wary, and will tend to move. And you use all kinds of techniques in the corrals. Maybe we can show that one day, how to move these animals the most efficiently and the best way, and make them move quickly without hurting anybody.
Um, the last thing I want to talk about with the discussion was I had no idea he started with Snapchat. Like
Huh.
I thought he, just one day decided kind of like us to take up on YouTube, but apparently he started with Snapchat and kind of grew from there. People were subscribing to his stories, which hold on for 24 hours and then they disappear. But that's what he did it. And to go to your point about the comedic part, he said, eventually they turned on a camera and it was the exact same thing as he was already doing, just being a smart aleck. And
Right.
all of a sudden it turned into camera work. And he goes, now we rarely take two takes. He goes, if it's two takes, it's like it's been a bad day. It's normally just I just off the cuff, we go for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that gives more genuineness to it too when you do that. I mean,
Sure.
we try to do the same thing. We edit for not for content, but for time when you do that. And sometimes it's bloopers and all get in there. It's like, well, it is what it is. I got other things to do. This is just recording this while we're going along because my kid's yelling at me to film everything. So,
Guilty
but
as
no, it's
charged.
and one of the things that he's got his own business where he's teaching kids or people how to bull ride, not just kids, and that's his passion, and that's what he does, and that's that whole subculture that we're not even close to. I mean, I appreciate a good bull ride, don't get me wrong, but I'm too old to get on them anymore, and I was built wrong in the first place. As a bull rider, that's what astounds me about Mooney. I don't know how tall JB Mooney is. But
I don't know.
he's
I think he's
lanky,
like 5'8", which is pretty
is he?
tall.
But he just seems lanky. But for a bull rider, that's about right. I mean,
And
little on
I've
the
always
high
known we're
side.
like 5'4", 5'6",
Yeah, but he's
with a
he's lean,
6'4" attitude.
right? Exactly, and that's a problem. I'm over 6 foot, 6'1", and with a long body. I mean, you got to be built for some of these things. Look at Michael
Oh, he's
Phelps.
5'10".
He's a tall man then for a bull
Yeah.
rider.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really tall guy for a bull rider. But look at Michael Phelps, the way his body is. He's like the perfect swimmer. So
Mm-hmm.
body type and body shape conformation makes a big difference on how you can excel on that stuff. And then just having just pure ass sheer toughness,
Yeah. Well,
that helps.
and that kind of goes into the next section that I had, which is perfect because you're talking about competitions and Dale Brisby's kind of into doing that stuff, but he takes a lot of precautions with head safety. He was talking about
Yeah.
the importance of a helmet and stuff, and I was kind of surprised pleasantly because as somebody who's been knocked in the head a few too many times, the importance, especially now these days, understanding the repercussions, especially long term.
Right.
We didn't it used to be you just got a dinger, you'll be fine. Even 20 years ago it was like that, which wasn't very long ago. And now in the last 10 years we've made such strides in understanding that, and I think part of it has to do with the war that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan, the blasts that people have received through IEDs and what that has done to the brain, not just physically, but mentally, how that impacts you with the thud to your head and everything. It's just I'm really happy to see that he is so safe with that. And the only difference was he said, I won't make the experienced riders do it. I don't require them. Somebody like JB Mooney, who's a professional bull rider, he's like, I'm not gonna make him do it. Like
Right.
he's made that decision long ago,
Right.
but he also knows the risks. And
Right.
these young kids don't necessarily know the risks. And if you know the risks, that's on you. I understand, but the kids don't necessarily. I'm trying to teach them early that it's not worth, taking that head trauma. Just, be like a weirdo, like everybody else, wear the bicycle helmet and you'll be all right.
Well, and you know, being fully informed is the key there. I think what could happen,
Yeah.
so I mean, I used to take you and your brother in the backcountry. You weren't all that old. You're able to ride your horse and probably what, 7, 8 years old,
Yeah.
maybe, and I made you guys wear a helmet
Yeah. And I hated
because
it.
you're in the backcountry. I mean, something can happen, anything can happen. A moose, a bear run out, horse wheel around, a little guy's not as paying attention like he could and not able to ride like he could. And next thing you know, you're spinning off and you're hitting your head on a big old chunk of granite. So I've made you guys wear helmets, and it's just kind of, again, you weren't old enough to fend for yourself. You didn't have the capability to do it. Well, when you get a new rider on a bull, it's kind of the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They can understand that and you can rationalize it, but do they really know what they're getting into? So
Right.
I think he's smart doing that. I think it's the right thing to do. So
Well, and like he talked about too, there's only one take at this,
oh, yep.
and especially with bull riding, because some of those bulls are meant to be mean.
Oh
And
yeah.
and he goes, the other thing too is, especially when, because they talked about JB Mooney, who recently announced retirement after I don't even know how many years of bull riding, but like Dale Brisby said, he said that was the only way he was going to not ride anymore, was that injury. And that injury is a neck injury that essentially he could have been a quadriplegic with what happened. Especially watching the video, he landed on his head in a weird way and he had to have emergency neck surgery. He walked into the ER and they said, "Whoa, You are not supposed to be walking right now. Lay here, do not move until a surgeon is here. And he went into emergency surgery. It was that type of an injury.
Mm-hmm.
But like Dale Brisby said too, what could be worse is you die from the neck down instead of the neck up. And that was an interesting statement that he said that I felt very truly. I was like,
Yep.
that is 100%. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of old school cowboys and stuff don't do that, because they're like, if I'm going to hit my head that hard, at least I went out the right way.
Exactly. One of the things, kind of going back to the research that's been done, there's been a lot of really good things come out of sports, particularly football and brain
Yeah.
injury. So, I mean, there's lots of protocols now. A lot of guys affected before it even really was on people's radar.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, he just got his bell rung. He'll be all right in a couple days. Or give him a couple of plays to come out, go back in, you'll be okay, and they don't remember the rest of the game.
Right.
So I mean, it's a lot of stuff's been done that way, and I'm really glad to see it. I've got a client that she insists on everybody has to have a helmet when they go out, and I've taken done some clinics with them, and they're in my clinics, and I'll go out and ride with them, and it's kind of funny because she's like, I know you're not going to wear a helmet. I'm going to make you. I said, no, I'm not going to wear a helmet.
I'll say if it's you
I've
or
never
me,
had one on my head. I don't plan to.
she's never made me wear one either when we've been there, and I appreciate that.
But it's kind of the same thing. You're aware of what the
Yeah.
risks are, and I would never hold her accountable for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your decision.
Well, and it kind of goes back to, there was just a segment of that conversation that I kind of identified as a theme as well. And it was just, you could identify with the fact that that's your interactions, your feats, your adventures, whatever it might be, that it was just, that's my thing. I understand it. There's a risk there, but you have to accept that for what it is. Otherwise you can't go in half-heartedly. You've got to go full bore.
Yeah. You don't half-ass anything like that. You commit.
I was surprised at the connections he had too. He talked about, I knew he knew JB Mooney because they actually kind of do a bucking bull business together. They're trying to, become stalkers for the
I gathered that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they've been doing it for a couple of years, and that's another hard business. You think it's hard being a bull rider? It's almost harder being a stalker because there's more people producing stock and trying to get that top level bull, let alone a couple bulls in the circuit. That's hard.
And all you need is one really, really good one.
That's true. One really good one. Like the name of Bodacious or Yellow Jacket.
Yeah.
But he had other connections too, which were Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which I had no idea he knew him. And Cerrone was a really famous fighter. He just retired last 12, 18 months ago.
Boy, and then he fought for a long time too.
So long. You want to talk about getting your bell rung? That dude. Work hard, party harder. If that wasn't that dude's mantra, that woo. And then I didn't realize, and this actually makes sense, and we'll get into more of the conversation later, but he knows a manager on the 4-6s ranch, which made a lot more connections kind of ring up in my head after that.
Yeah.
But the other thing too was some observations I had in general of what he had, and he kind of explained was, Dale Brisby talks about, you're in this business long enough and you start to see trauma, and he goes, sometimes you almost get too desensitized to the part where it could be debilitating, and it's like, oh, you should maybe take that a little more seriously than you should. And I just wanted to find out what you thought about that.
It's absolutely true. I mean,
yeah,
there's something about, and it's cultural. You grow up with a bunch of older men they're not a bunch of softies. These are hard, calloused men.
Yeah.
And something to happen to you, and they go, well, you'll be all right. It's a long ways from your heart. You better get your horse, get him caught, and get back on him. That was it. I mean, and you never, when you got hurt, you never showed that it hurt, ever. If you limped, try not to limp, because it just meant that you were not quite as tough as what you said you were. And I think it's very much the same way there. I mean, it's you grit your teeth and you work through things, and even when you can't, it hurts. You never admit it, as that's just a sign of weakness. And it's not necessarily right, but it's just a culture you grow up in. Here's the reality of it. You had to do that because there were no medical services around. You couldn't afford medical services. What's going to happen anyway? Look at the long term of that. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Unless you're out and it's serious, you got a broken neck or you got a leg that's pointing the wrong direction, you're not going to do anything different.
Well, and he talked about that a little bit later too, about some of his injuries that he's going through at, 36, and as an amateur bull rider, by all means, he's not a professional or anything, but I kind of highlighted that because he was talking about it later in the discussion. But I was thinking, what would we do without surgeries and the ability to
Oh,
just pick up and say, oh yeah, my shoulder's been messed up for a while. I'm just gonna go have a surgery next week. Like
yeah.
especially the things that he's gone through physically, and some of the other things that other people go through. What would we do without that convenience and that ability to do that?
Well, and I think you don't see people. Uh, Even when I was a kid, you'd see old guys with an arm that was twisted, or where they'd broken a wrist and it healed
Never
wrong.
healed. Yeah.
Really never got any care for it, or a leg. You remember seeing a man that maybe you don't. We used to train a lot of horses for. Bought some horses from him. He'd broken his leg in the
Oh yeah.
wintertime.
Yep.
And you remember that you get one foot like this, and the other foot was like this,
Yep.
and he just got around like that. He was out there a couple days. They straightened it out, but he had to feed cattle, couldn't get any help, and he just out there, and it kind of migrated the wrong direction. It didn't hold a set, and he walked around like that. You used to see people like that. You don't see that so much anymore because, like you say, we've got the ability to go in. You know what? And then, God, in an outpatient thing, I can get a bone taken care of. I can get a plate put in. And you're sitting home on the couch for a couple of days, do the best you can. You get back out there, get to work again. We can fix a lot of things that were one before it was a major thing to fix them, or they couldn't afford them quite like they can now. I mean, we're a lot of times we think we're a little bit better off that way, even though if you don't have insurance, there's some means there, but I don't think we're willing to maim ourselves and leave it as a permanent thing like we used to.
Yeah. Moving on a little bit, he kind of explained the rodeo events well. I felt he broke it down, the rough stock, the
Mm-hmm.
timed event, stuff like that. And then him specifically, his sharing of the event, getting into the chutes, tying yourself to a bull. He said there's a fear to start there, but he goes, that's my path nonetheless. I just keep doing it. And then he never was, he said he was never pushed that way, even though his dad was very much involved in rodeoing, became a pickup man in the later part of his years. But he said that was, like he said, he was never pushed, but it definitely was his path. Everything just kind of pointed toward that. And I can't help but think it's just your surroundings too, nature versus nurture type thing. But I can understand what he's saying by that. He was never pushed, but it was definitely his path.
Yeah, well, and there's also the thing that if you do something that's kind of risky or dangerous and you get away with it and you get a thrill out of it, now you want to do it again.
Sure.
Right? There's that first time, it's like, I don't know, but you make it and you go like, oh, that was fun. Let's do it
Yep.
again. And I mean, that is definitely, it's a Y chromosome thing. I mean, we just are built for, most of us, I think, for adrenaline and thrill, and so that happens. And then once you get that taste of that, adrenaline it's like an opiate. It's a drug. It affects you, and you want more of it. So, yeah, it was interesting to me too about the perspective there with his dad. I wanted to rodeo as a kid, and my dad would not let me. He's like, nope, ain't doing it. Your uncle Ron, and he'll see this someday. He was a good bull rider and won a lot, but cost a lot too,
Yeah.
and he got hooked in the head with a bull one year and ripped open his scalp. I mean, he won a lot. He's really good at it. And he just didn't go very far because he went, you know what? I gotta do something different. He's smart. Uncle Ronald's he's smart. And so that was a thrill and it was a way to do it. And it's, fun, but they weren't making money at it then. It was, purely for some getting around money and just the thrill of it.
Well, and to Brisby's point too, he pointed out we don't care about money. It's not that important. We're just there
Right.
for the lifestyle. And he goes, if it wasn't for the fact that you needed to get as many winnings as you can to get to the NFR to show how much you
Right.
earned over the year, we would care about it even less. And I was like,
That's
well,
right.
that's a pretty darn good explanation right there.
It really is. Except the one part about that is it doesn't matter whether it would be points or money. It's still the competitiveness to be the
Yeah.
best. They'd still do it. But yeah, money is the means, and it's what gets them from one place to another too. And there's a reason why 6 of those guys will pile into an old Cadillac and they travel together.
Well, and we'll start with that because I want to kind of talk about Rodeoing first, and then we'll get into like the real world application, so to speak. But one of it was Joe Rogan said, he goes, I imagine few party harder than rodeo people. And Dale Brisby kind of paused for a second and he goes, yeah, I'd agree with that. And it was so just calm, cool, collected, and matter of fact that I was like, yeah, I can't help but disagree with what he just said either. Like that's pretty accurate, especially the people I know. Like, man, you got some wild people that they they're chasing that high. You know what I mean?
Right.
That adrenaline high, that partying high, that just going out and having fun high. And I can't help but disagree with, or can't help but agree with
Yeah.
that very fact of I fear very few party harder than that.
Well, and I'll give you a perspective on that. When I was in law enforcement, I ran across a bunch of guys. It was during the Sturgis time.
Yeah.
A lot of bikers, and I went in on a place. You're traveling by yourself and remotely, and these guys, there was about 2 dozen of them, and they were all colored up, and I come in on them and early of a morning, and some of them were rousing up, getting up, and going to start moving on, but very respectful, and I respected them. Like, I didn't give them a bunch of crap. They weren't doing anything wrong. And there were some of them that were still a little bit inebriated, you might say. And I had a conversation with them, talked to them, and then made the contact, and then I left. Well, I was mentioning it to somebody, and they go, "Didn't that bother you by yourself?" And I go, "No, not really. I mean, if something's going to happen, it's going to happen."
Yeah.
And I said, besides that, I would rather deal with 2 dozen bikers who have been dumped and they've spent some jail time and they know how the game goes. And as long as you are respectful to them, they'll largely be respectful to you, generally. I said, I'd rather deal with 2 dozen bikers than 3 drunk cowboys, because those guys are not going to quit. They won't take direction. They're going to fight you. And I said, the reason I
And
know
they
that,
just mouth off.
yeah, I used to be one of those 3 drunk cowboys. I know how that works. So, yeah, I mean, it's all about don't tell me what to do. I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and they get like that. It's kind of stupid because you'll get some scars on you, and guess what? You might end up behind bars and learning some stuff from the bikers, but it's the
Yeah.
way it is.
Um, I did get excited by him talking about riding though. He's like, it's in your blood, man, and he
Yeah,
just his excitement about it. And I agree with that. It's like
yeah,
ranching, farming, whoever, whatever sector you're in, it gets in your blood and you can't help but let it go. Even though when there's, like he said, you might go 6, 7 rides without riding. You won't hit that 8 seconds. You're just
right.
throwing money into a rodeo every night. And eventually you get it because it's in your blood, man. Like you got to keep going. To an extent, I could see where there's he talks about how he doesn't really drink. Like he'll drink, but he hasn't really gone around drinking like a lot of the cowboys do,
Yeah.
like we were just talking about. But I imagine it's kind of like that, like an alcoholic or a junkie. It kind of gets in your blood and you can't get rid of that itch.
Well, but it's not a lot different, except that you don't have the huge adrenaline rush like that, because it's all out. You're just going for broke. I feel the same way about training horses. I love to train. I love training, and I can't imagine not training. And when I go times where I don't have a lot of horses in between, I get just like, oh God, I need to get on a horse. I need to train something. Not that I can't get on any horse. We got plenty to get on. I want to be able to get on this horse because there is a thrill to that. There's an unpredictability, but it's also your ability to take that and make something of that horse. It's a whole
Yeah.
different thing, but it's the same basal type emotion that goes with that. That It's a drive. It's a drive that you have got to satisfy.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think this is a direct quote. It was in my notes. It just says passionate niche, which I can't help but agree with that too.
Yeah.
Like it is such a niche. It's just a small sliver of our whole culture as the United States, and there's nothing but just passion and sheer just gratitude and a drive to be a part of it that I get that and I understand where he's coming from with that. And I think that's the helpful part of him being on social media is he helps kind of illustrate that visually and through jokes and stuff of why it
Right.
is so fun and why we do love it.
But I think that's a universal thing. I mean, you could be a motocross rider, you could be a hill
Right.
climber, all of your sports. When you get up to the college and professional levels, sometimes it's about money, unfortunately, and not the love of the game. But a lot of our sports are like that. There's professions that are like that. People are passionate about them. And it's
Uh-huh.
that same, I think it's exactly the same drive. It's very parallel to that. It just happens to be with him. It's bull riding.
Yeah. Kind of moving on to the real world aspect. Uh, he talked about being a day worker for the 4 6s. I had you and I had talked about him before, specifically on I think it was a shoot or a short about social media people and in the ag or ranching industry, and we specifically talked about him. And you go, he's a goofball, but you can tell he's a hand. Like he
Yeah.
kind of knows what he's doing. And I had no idea where he got that knowledge from, but that conversation helped explain that he's a day worker. He'll
Yeah.
go and he said specifically, he'll go do weaning in the fall for about 2 weeks for the 4 6s, and then he'll help them brand in the spring for a couple weeks. Which again, it was one of those light bulb moments. It's like, there it is. That's where
Yeah.
he's got that knowledge from. I didn't know that.
Well, and whenever you hear somebody trash talk a little bit, they're either just a trash talker and they're trying to skate by, or they really know what's going on and they're
Yeah.
trash talking. There's not
Yeah.
much of an in between there, you know.
Well, and to kind of segue into the other part of this conversation, he said, and this was a quote, and I loved it, and I posted it for our various social media. And he goes, "I'm not going to trade this lifestyle for more money." They talked about how he's had opportunities with Netflix, which he's recently had a Netflix show come out. He's done some other things too, but there's been opportunities, he said, where he's been approached and said, "We will pay
Mhm.
you this amount to do exactly what we tell you." And he goes,
No.
"No, it's not worth it." He goes, I'd rather be where I'm at, which is comfortable, and I'm doing my own thing and I'm making my own money and I'm doing all right. But I'm not going to do that just because of more money. I'm going to keep doing what I love and what I do."
Well, we've had a couple opportunities the same way with us through my clinics and teaching, and they want to do like a documentary, and
Yeah.
then they want to do this, and no, I'm not doing that. We it's gonna if you want a documentary, that's fine, we can do that, but I am not gonna set things up and stage things. And they
Yeah.
just they went away,
That's
you
not what
know.
documentary
So
is about, man. Which at this point, we with the low budget equipment that we got, I think we could still probably pull off a documentary and be just fine.
right, but the point is, then it's not really what it is. It's
Right.
it's Hollywood, or in their case, it was a different area, but still doing the same thing. They're producing something that they think that the public wants, and I had quite a long conversations with them, over it, and it was hours of explaining, and they're like, okay, that's not what we want. We want to do this. And it's like, okay, well, you'll find somebody who will do that. That's okay.
Yeah. Somebody will sell their soul,
Yep,
but we're
I'm
not
not going
going
to be a
to.
part of that.
The other part though, like I said, the real world part, I liked how he kind of explained it. And this is where we did talk last week about it. And I said, hey, you hold it, because he doesn't quite understand how actual ranching works. He knows how to be a day worker, but when it comes to like the producing part, he's not necessarily aware of it. He said he enjoys watching, he's kind of a fan of watching a calf go to steak, which I am too. You know the process, you understand how it
Yeah,
works. One day that little calf, little 334, whatever, is gonna go to the butcher, and it's no longer gonna be 334. It'll be steak on your plate, and it's
right.
just one of those things. But I appreciate his explanation of it. But those calves aren't butchered at a year. It's closer to
No,
like 2 or 3 years.
right, right, exactly. No, that was Usually 36 months is a really, if you want to put a number to it, that's a really good number, 36
Yeah.
months, because you're looking at about 1,400 pounds at a year. You're not quite at 1,000 pounds, or you're
Yeah.
approaching 1,000 pounds, and then that's going from a calf to your stalker. And at the end of the stalker background, or same thing, where you're just feeding them up, get them more size, more muscle, letting them graze essentially, and you're feeding them. And then they go to the feedlot for finish for that last, 300-400 pounds, and it takes a while to do that. So yeah, no calves are harmed, in the making of this steak.
Well,
They're
and,
older.
and
They're older animals.
I'll give him a little credit. He did a pretty good job of explaining the three phases, cow,
Yeah.
calf, pair,
Yep.
then going to the stalker, and then eventually feeder. What I wished he would have been a little more armed with or understanding of explaining to Rogan that, um, you know, something can be grain finished and it's not bad for you.
Right.
They were kind of harping on that and like, listen, like you can have grass finished, which we've talked about on this channel as well. Grass finished is fine. But it's just a different flavor is all. And it's not going to harm you if you have grain finished. Grain finish is only just adding fat that results directly in some of that flavoring that you get when you cook the meat, and
Right.
that's kind of where I was like, man, I wish you knew a little bit more so you could kind of punch that one as an emphasis a little bit, but that, it's okay. It is
Well,
what it
yeah,
is.
but I think Joe Rogan is, he's on the that carnivore type diet, which is fine. I mean, hey, yeah, I got a I got a vegetable converter too. It's called beef. But I think that there's much emphasis being made on grass fed because it is very close to venison.
Yeah.
We're not finishing venison, and that's where his point was. Is like his favorite piece of meat is overall is elk, and which exactly you're doing the same thing with a grass fed beef. The perspective I got a number of years ago as a really good friend of ours who's a cardiologist, and we had a steak down on his, we had a big bunch of steaks we grilled up and sitting there, and I said, I'm sorry, but I didn't trim this. There's some fat on the edge, and he's eating, and I go, you're a cardiologist and you're eating this. He goes, yeah, you got to have some fat. You got to have it in your diet. He said, yeah, if you did nothing but eat a lot of this all the time, now we get a different issue. And so that really kind of made me think and do a little bit more educating myself on that. And he's like, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's about the moderation of it. You can have that, trim all that excess fat off, and still have the marbling in there, which we desire in our grain fed finished animals. And I think that I don't think enough is made of that, because there's a pendulum that's swung that says all fat's bad, and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily true. It's how you consume it.
Well, and I mean, to that point, I'll be honest. I've seen a lot of stuff recently with people going carnivore diet, partly because of autoimmune issues and stuff. And I've seen the the positive outcomes from it. And it's something that it's been kind of in my head recently. I'm like, it'd be interesting to maybe try it for a month or two and see how I actually feel. Because what it is ultimately is it's remove all excess foods except for one thing that is meat. And then
Right.
you slowly add things back, which I think ultimately the lesson learned is probably just the fact that we are such a bread and sugar heavy culture that's what it is really. Those are the two things that if you just cut back or remove the sugar and you minimize your bread intake, you'd probably be fine. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been seeing as a reoccurring thing that a lot of people are starting to go towards that carnivore diet because of what, the things that you just pointed out.
Well, and sugar and carbs, they taste good.
They do.
And processed stuff is bad for your body. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think that's a big secret.
No.
There's moderation of stuff. Your mom does a lot of honey and a lot of stuff instead of sugars. And you know what? I can't tell the difference really in
It's
it. And
good.
it's good. It may have, some things have a slightly different taste, but it's still sweet.
Yeah.
And I think honey's a very natural, very healing type um, thing in a product, natural product in most cases, and especially raw honey. But yeah, having knowledge of where your food's coming from, and I don't disagree with what he says about the glyphosates, things
Yeah.
like that. I mean, man, those are not meant to go in your body, and you are getting them. I don't disagree with that at all. That also is why we get highest production, and we're on this ball of mud that we're we are feeding a bunch of people that ain't all of them getting fed either. That's some geopolitical stuff, but
Yeah.
we're producing food.
No, I
Nobody's
agree.
like you were talking. Nobody's. It used to be there's people dying of starvation. How we're dying of obesity now,
Yeah.
especially in this country.
Complete difference.
Yeah.
But I did also appreciate how he walks through some of the taste and the tenderness of steak too. He explained really well how, bulls aren't that good if you
Right.
butcher them. But he was curious because like Dale Brisby is on the carnivore diet too, is what he said. But he had excess. He needed meat, and he had a bull that got hurt and just wasn't gonna get fixed. So he said, "I'll butcher him, see how he tastes." And he goes, he'll
Yeah.
still eat him, but he goes, I would prefer like that younger calf, steer cow that you butcher at 36 months old rather than this, because it's a little tough.
Right. Well, and it is just everybody knows when a bull, we just call them hamburger. That's a pile of hamburger there
Yep.
because they're really not as palatable as your younger animals and have a finish on them. I mean, you'd have to throw a ton. I don't know if you could do it that well either because that bull muscle is so dense.
Yeah.
You would have to finish them for a long time to get some marbling in there, and I'm still not sure the taste and the tenderness would be there.
Yeah, I don't either. But he also brought up a point of being able to differentiate bulls and everything. And I had mixed feelings about that because he did a good job of explaining, you can look at a heifer or a steer or a bull and you can be like, yep, those are different. And you don't
Right.
have to be able to look. But when he said as a baby calf, you can just look at their head and tell if they're a heifer or a calf, a bull calf. I was like, I get what
Not
you're trying to
always.
say there, but that's not really accurate because that's not always true when it comes to branding season. I can't always tell that.
Yeah, you get some faces that are pretty feminine looking, and you get some
Yeah.
pretty masculine looking calves that are like, oh, that's a heifer. I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yep.
it's not quite. I mean, largely you can kind of, but it's all a 50-50 guess.
Right.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 50-50 for sure. Well, and he brought up too the last thing I'll say, kind of reverting back to the rodeo part was he goes, um, sometimes having a bull around those livestock, they enjoy those years so much longer versus the produced ones because
Yeah.
and I'm kind of tying this all together because um we are production, right? Like we take these calves, we produce them, and we raise them until either they're 6-8 months old and they're sold off, and then they're kept around for a little bit longer until it's time to be butchered, right? And
Mhm.
at most, like he said, they'll last no longer than 36 months. They'll be around for 3 years and they'll be getting fat, and that's it. Versus some of the livestock in the rodeo industry, they get to have a full-fledged life until death, and they have a good life too. His explaining of those bulls and those broncs that are ridden, they
Yeah.
got a good life because they know the game.
Right.
Because they walk into that chute and they know it's game time, baby. They're gonna try and buck this guy off. And he goes, but then at the same time, they have a good quality of life. They are an athlete. They're taken care of. They have
Yeah.
great health care, and they're just hanging out. That you can pet them, play with them, do whatever you want. But then as soon as they're in the chute, it's game on, babe. Let's go.
Well, and anytime you've got a bull that's got a covered roof over them and some air conditioning, maybe
Yep.
that you got some value there. I mean, we get that for ourselves mostly, but uh, it's funny to watch them because it's a game for them, and you'll see some of these bulls that'll buck hard, and when the buzzer sounds, they'll quit bucking.
They're done. Yeah.
They're done. You know, and it isn't always that flank strap helps them to kick and buck, but and especially like the horses, bulls the same way. But yeah, it's funny to watch that. It's like, yeah, they've got it figured out. They know what they got to do to get this guy off, and then once it's done, or they're bucking in the buzzer, then they kind of slow it up and because the guy's jumping off anyway. And I mean, some of that's probably just coincidence
Yeah.
happening together, but still, some of them will get done bucking the buzzer and then they face the gate looking to get out. They know where they gotta go.
Yep. No, well, and his other part too, and we've talked about this on another conversation, is the rodeo aspect of a flank strap. He goes, everybody goes in and says you're wrapping something around the bull's testicles, or
Yeah.
you're doing the same thing to the horse. And he goes, that'd be really interesting to do to a mare.
Right.
I don't have balls to wrap some sort of thing around to try and keep them to buck. He's like, I just don't do it. Like, I don't know what that would be. I don't know how I would do it, but I would be curious to see what the suggestions are, because it's just a flank strap. And he goes, I've done it on my own horse. Because
Right.
he's not a bucking horse. He's not bred. He's not raised to be a bucking horse. I've taken him out of a chute, and he just like walked out and was like, what are you doing, dude? Like, this is weird.
Right. I thought that was funny. It's just, when we train horses, we're putting ropes around them up under their feet, their flanks, their tail. Same thing to try to not get a response.
Yeah.
You know,
We're doing the opposite. We're teaching them not
yeah.
to, versus that industry teaches them to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It just helps them to kick and get a better movement. Yeah. So no, I really enjoyed that podcast. It was I got a lot of respect. I got a lot of respect for both those guys. Rogan asked some really good questions, always, in something it's something that I've never even heard of or don't know about. And he asked some very good questions. He's a good interviewer. And Brisby has got much more depth to him than I anticipated to begin with, and I was glad to see that, and in a way not surprised either. Just it's good to have confirmation of that.
Yeah, it was, like I said, it was a good podcast. Can't believe it was pretty much a year around. But one last thing I had an appreciation for was his origin. We talked about it was being on Snapchat a little bit. But also he said he did it starting with prank calls back in 2013.
Yeah.
And he was just doing, it was fun, and then it turned into a business. And he said that, a passion for what you enjoy and trying to make some money at it while you do it equals success. And it helped me with a little bit of perspective, because we've been at this gig on YouTube for 3 years, and we're slowly gaining some followers and here and there, and to know where he's at after 10 years of it, and we're just at the 3-year mark, I'm like, okay, it's like, this doesn't happen overnight. It's a nice little reminder that trying to get some of the social media following and some of the extra diversification that we've talked about, it's not just a one time and done type thing. You gotta work at it. It takes some time and a little bit of patience.
It is, and I think it's easier to sell humor than it is to sell education, and
Sure.
really that's what we're doing is, we want people to understand and be kind of a resource from our perspective, obviously.
Yeah.
But to have that niche, and again, that's a passionate niche too, like you said. The guy's a practical joker, and a lot of us are, but yeah, what a great way to take your personality and put that to good use, good positive use, and have a lot of fun with it. Is pretty funny. Prank calls. There's a guy named Roy Dean Mercer. He used to do recorded calls on, God knows, it was radio stations. If you go on YouTube, you can hear a bunch of his stuff, and it's hilarious. The guy is witty, and he's always going to be what was it? Some of his bylines were, how big a boy are you? And he goes, I'll just come down there and put a pop knot on your head, and some of these people, I mean, he starts fights,
oh my goodness.
And but it is, some of his stuff is hilarious. But same thing, starts out as, he's just doing practical jokes on people, and they've got quite a following like that. But yeah, I really enjoy, I got a lot of respect for Dale Brisby, much more respect now than I did before that podcast, because I didn't know anything about him other than the stuff you'd see, I'm thinking, and I thought, it was good, clean fun, and hoping he's doing well. Well, now, knowing a little bit more about him, even hope that in spades, so sure. It's really good. And of course, Rogan, I always enjoy his stuff. I wish he would quit saying Bronco when oh my God,
it
bucking
is
Bronco.
What it is.
Yeah, but he doesn't know that, again, it's being on the outside of the culture and trying to communicate, and he's not making fun of it. He's just, what he doesn't know, just same as us. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't know, try to talk about or have a conversation about, and I'll use terminology that's probably not correct.
Yeah, but one thing I'll really point out about him too, which I think is interesting. I don't watch all of his stuff. I just kind of, the things that I'm interested in, I'm like, oh, I know that guy, or I know of him, or I've heard of him or her, and I'm interested in what they're doing. Of course, I saw Dale Brisby. I jumped on that right away. But the big thing was, I've noticed he read a lot about tribes and human interactions and stuff like that. And he talked about it a lot when he was in Los Angeles, big community, big population, understanding people, how they work. It makes sense. He has since moved to Texas, is in Austin now. a little bit more open country, more freeing, and very
Austin's pretty. I think that's a stepping stone from California to the real Texas too. I think
yeah.
Austin is pretty.
But what I'm saying though is like his interactions have changed a little
Yeah.
bit,
Yep.
and because of that, he's also embraced the culture a little bit more. I think partly to understand where he is now,
Yeah.
and also to just kind of I want to learn about this place that I'm joining because I really like it here. So I'm going to embrace it fully. He has gotten into the things like Dale Brisby, understanding that, but then also he's talked a lot recently, and that was the other one that I sent you. And we're probably not going to discuss it ever on here, but about Western expansionism
Mm-hmm.
and the interaction between white settlers and Native Americans. And he's learned a lot about, to his credit, about the Comanche people in Texas. The guy that I sent you about actually wrote a book that I'll probably read one of these days because it pertains to our neck of the woods, which was the Nez Perce, and
Mm-hmm.
talks about this dude took 30 years of his career and just slowly developed this collection of information, and he wrote a book on it. And after
Oh,
30 years later, this book about the Nez Perce, and he goes, it's much more convoluted than what you think it is. It's not just all these things, but I just wanted to say, like, to Joe Rogan's point, I'm glad to see he's not just focused on like tribalism and stuff anymore, but I see him learning about his culture and his new area that he's at. And I thought that was
yeah.
pretty cool. And I think Dale Brisby is a really good kind of microcosm of that change. And I'm appreciative of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. I think it's really important to keep in mind. And it's the one thing that and I'm not trying to be overcritical of how he speaks about things. It just, that's one of those, that is a word that just gets me, because you have people that are just complete novices
Yeah.
trying to fit in. And that is one of the words they use. And it kind of, it's funny to me, but he absolutely is, or I see him trying to do what we ask people to do when they move somewhere, and that is become part of the culture. Don't come here to change it and become what you left, because what you left is what you didn't want.
And
So I like to see that.
even if you don't become part of the culture, like I don't think Joe Rogan ever will because it's just not in his nature. He grew up
Right.
in New Jersey in the Boston area, right? But he's taken a step back and he's learning about it to kind
Yeah.
of work his way into it rather than just say, "Hey, I'm here," and just
Right.
like burst
Right.
through the door like the Kool-Aid man, He's
Right.
he's taken the time to appreciate and to learn. And I
Right.
really I on my own, I have a deep sense of gratitude for that.
Well, and I think that takes a lot of it takes a lot of putting yourself and your ego aside to do that.
Sure.
And I totally appreciate that. I think it's a good thing. I mean, that's a great thing. I'm not going to go into New Jersey or Boston and live there, because that's not where I want to be.
Yep.
But you know what, when I'm there, and I've been in Boston or the area, Washington DC. I haven't been to New York, but when I'm there, I kind of show up as I am. But you know what? I don't. I just am there. I try to fit in with what they're doing, because I don't know any different. Because I'm just going to hold stuff up. I'm going to be in people's way, and that's not what I want to do.
Yeah. Well, that was Dale Brisby. If anybody's interested, episode what I got here, 2057. Man, that dude's been at it for a while. So
Wow.
2057. If you're interested, go to Spotify or look up Joe Rogan Experienced 2057 Dale Brisby. It's an interesting watch. You can also just listen to it. You don't have to watch
Yeah.
it. It's not that interesting to watch, but it is interesting to listen to if you're down the road or something like that. But take a peek at it. See what you have to say. If you got comments or something to add, throw them down below. And with that, I'll hand it to Dan.
Well, it's not much of an exit for this, other than thanks for hanging out and watching two guys that are not that interesting to watch, and maybe you can listen on it going down the road. And we will thank you till you're better paid.